Dustin, what was next on your list?
Next on my list is Dune Part 2, Denis Villeneuve's
Ooh.
space opera masterpiece. I want to make very clear that while we're just getting to this now, this is my absolute, by far, hands down, no argument, number one best film of the year. It has been since February. When you make a top 10 list, sometimes you're sliding, oh, maybe this one's number four, this is number five. Dune is so far beyond, like it's at number one, and even number two, so far away from it. It
Agreed.
is galaxies away. I know some people that like the first one better, and that's fine. I was B plus on the first one, but this one is really the first movie. The first Dune movie was kind of like a warm up, an appetizer, but this one is just, I don't know, the production design, the editing, the sound, every single category. The best way I know how to describe why I like this movie and how good it is. If anybody hasn't seen it yet, everybody should have seen it by this point. But it is the closest thing to being as good cinematic quality as Lord of the Rings. I don't think we've seen anything that is on that nearly perfect level. And sometimes you don't realize how good that is until you get farther away. I mean, people liked Lord of the Rings when it came out, but looking back now, 20 years old, you're like, whoa, how it still stands the test of time. And even though technology's advanced and it still looks that good for a movie from 2001, I mean, so if people are not fully realizing how good it is in this moment, I think they will later because it's just so well done. The suspense, there's hardly anything wrong with it. It's just, and I did have a chance. I saw it originally in IMAX. I rewatched it again at home, and it was just as good. I still got cold chills in multiple scenes as I rewatched it, and it's just it's exciting as both someone who writes and talks about film for a living and as someone who is just a fan of movies. It like pleases on both levels so fascinatingly.
Mark, I already know what I think about Dune. I want to hear what you think about it.
So I'm agreeing with Dustin on this. It's my number
Okay.
one. And when we get to like that number one spot, we can just say like rewind the tape and go back. So I've read the book, and I knew going into part one that because it's such a monumental text and it's so dense with huge vocabulary and terminology and processes that Herbert was so specific about, that Villeneuve had not only his work cut out for him just to recreate all this faithfully visually on screen, we had to find a natural resting place to not exhaust the audience. So when he cuts at part one with Paul finally finding the Fremen and going out into the desert, it is the continuation of the first novel in part two. But on so many levels, this film excels not only expectations, but reinvents the craft both in old school ways of making films, in new digital ways of inventing films. It adds even more fascinating characters through exceptional acting in this. Hans Zimmer's score delivers. It's rousing. It is emotional. It's full of vengeance. It pays off all of the threads that are introduced in the first one exceptionally well. And the only way now forward is to finish Paul's story with Messiah, which I'm literally counting down like on a wall in my bedroom until that comes out. So for me, it's like Dustin said, it's miles above everything else. There are other films that I really enjoyed and can argue the merits for as whether it's an A or an A minus, but because this hits on an emotional level as a fanboy of the science fiction genre, of the book itself, it carries everything so far forward that this is literally miles ahead of everything else. I think the only detraction for the film is that because of the strikes, it came out when it came out.
Yeah.
If it had held its November release date for last year's Oscars, it would be a very different discussion.
Dune 2 was also my number one.
Yeah,
We're
there
all
you go.
unanimous in that one.
We are agreed on something.
Absolutely. I was a fan of Dune, the David Lynch Dune.
Oh, wow.
It had its day, and it had its moment, and honestly,
it had its moments.
I like that he went back to the book. I like that he deviated from the book. And to give you a great example, Mark, you mentioned the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
When the first Dune came out, they handed you a page when you walked into the theater. I don't know how you were going to read that when the lights went down, with all these different terms and a glossary of terms for you to, as the movie went on, you could understand, oh, that's what that is. That's what that is. And, I guess it just didn't occur to anybody to assign those parts to different people. In the first one, and I know we're talking about part two, but Lady Jessica had lines that were not hers in the book, but were given to her in order to explain some of the things that need to be explained in some of the scenes. It was really well written both times. The score, I don't know, you guys did not mention the score. I loved
Music
it.
is so good.
I think Hans Zimmer getting this one, although I think he did the score for Blitz also, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he's nominated at the Globes, but he is disqualified from the Academy.
Oh, because I remember, because it's so similar to what he did in Dune 1. And I don't know how John Williams never got away with that.
Have you heard a Star Wars movie?
Right. Anyway, this is the movie that made Timothée Chalamet a super action hero. He was a great actor. We knew that from all of his previous films. I think that is the first one that he's actually a serious contender, although I don't think he's going to win this time. If he won, he would be very deserving of it. Not that he wasn't deserving for Call Me By Your Name, but I just don't think anyone knew him then. He's a known quantity now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and look into Mark White's crystal ball here and say that I think he'll get the nomination, but he won't win. I think you're right. However, Paul's story finishing in Messiah, that's a different story.
His, it could be all his.
Goes through the ringer. And if he can bring that same...
Because I'm the person that hasn't read the book. So,
so no spoilers. Where Paul's story finishes is a chef's kiss. And like, if Villeneuve can stick with that, then that's Timothy's to take.
Denis Villeneuve does not make that. I mean, he is one of the most capable. He has ascended so quickly to, he's like only like number 2 behind Christopher Nolan. Like what he has accomplished in a short amount of time.
I agree.
And
I think the difference between Dune 1 and Dune 2 and how you guys feel like Dune 1 was just a setup for the slam dunk that Dune 2 became, I think it was all budget.
I like to give Denis credit. And I said in my review, I remember this very distinctly because it was a movie that I could have easily given an A2. But I said in my review, Dune really will be how good or bad this movie is will really depend on how good or bad the second one is. So now I would probably go back and give the first Dune an A because now, it seems like
everything he did well in Dune 1, he did exceptionally well in Dune 2. The difference to me was the visual effects. And again, he was able to do a lot more. And I still get goosebumps every time I see that scene with the Harkonnen scaling the mountain.
Again, and just beautiful cinema. There's so many other things to talk about.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay.
Whose turn is it?
We talked about, you said Dune alphabetically, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're entering our top 5s is what we're looking at here.
I still have at number 7. That was Conclave, which is probably in y'all's top 5.
Mark did not love it. But let's talk about how good it is. Mark can talk about why he doesn't like it.
I thought the performances made that movie. It was a great adaptation of the book. It was a straightforward adaptation of the book. I don't know that every twist and turn was, to me, very similar to a Robert Harris novel. So I like the idea of the setting. I like it was a good setting to make a story. The story was great. Okay, I won't argue that point. But I think the performances were what made the movie for me. Ralph Fiennes was great. I think this is the time he finally could get it.
Well, he's only been nominated twice. He's never won. I think he's the one to beat when the dust settles.
I think he did very well.
Stanley Tucci's amazing. I don't understand the whole Russell.
I think Ralph Fiennes he showed us something he hasn't shown us before.
Good guy instead of a bad guy.
I think Isabella Rossellini is a long shot, but I think Hollywood needs to do more with Isabella Rossellini.
And the fact that she's getting nominated different places show how much people love this movie, even though she just has a few lines. Its presence, its legacy. But, when you start getting nominees that don't really deserve to be there, no offense.
Well,
I love this movie.
She kills every scene she's in this movie. But again, I just think there was not enough meat on the bone.
Right. But the fact that she's still getting nominated is because that just shows the love for the movie. So you talked about the performances. I loved the cinematography for this. The umbrellas, this could have been a very boring, and I think young people don't want to watch this. They're like, oh, it's about, Vatican, the popes, blah, blah, blah. But the way he shoots this, it just makes it more interesting. It makes it more thrilling. The editing and the music. This is absolutely my favorite score of the year. I mean, there are technical elements that I loved as much as the performances. I just was so into this. I've watched this one twice. I can't wait to watch it again. This is about as old school movie as it gets. It is really good old school movie, but it is just very old Hollywood type of movie. It's not reaching for the ceiling. It's not trying anything new. It's that phrase, they don't make them like that anymore, and they don't. It's just good, solid, middle ground filmmaking, and I think that's why I really liked it. It's like, this is the movies that we loved in the 90s that Miramax would release.
I don't disagree with that. That's a great way to sum it up. I think you're exactly right about that. It was solid. Like you said, the plot twists were not, I mean, they were suspenseful, but not unpredictable, except the very, very end, which was quite unusual, but not in a distracting way. I agree with that.
All right, Mark, you can tell us your counter.
So there were two thrillers that were like worth considering for the best of the year for me. And September 5th definitely trumps. Conclave left me cold. And this is someone who loved what Berger did with All Quiet on the Western Front. I've had a conversation with Dustin about this over the last couple of days. I actually had never read the book. It did not actually click onto the fact that it was an adaptation of a book. But I called the ending about 45 minutes before the movie ended. I was like, so here's a cardinal who's never been to the Conclave. He's never been to the Vatican. We introduce him smoking gun style and we hide him away for a bit. And then we tease him. So like, obviously he's going to pay off for something. When they tease the fact that he had surgery and then is like, we're not going to talk about that. And then it comes back up again, but he had a surgery. I'm like, so it was either he's transgender or he's got something going on. And I was close. He was intersex. It was because it was so predictable that I kind of found myself going, yeah, okay.
I think you're in the minority. I think if I showed this to every single person that I know, nobody would guess the ending. Nobody would see that coming. I think there's so many other things going on, so many other players, so many other options, so many other things that stands out like a sore thumb. Well, it did for you. But if you go back, there's so many other routes that it looks like it might take, including Ray Fiennes. There's so many roads being presented. You just don't know which one it's going to go down. I want to tell a story really quick. So when I went to the theater to watch this, first, I brought a friend. Okay. My friend had to leave in the last 30 minutes. So he left in suspense. And, I didn't have the script at that point. He didn't go back to the theater to watch it. He wanted me to tell him the ending, and I refused. I said, when I get the screener in a couple of months, you can come over and we'll rewatch it. Between now and then, I want you to try to guess the ending based on where you stopped. And he stopped right there when Ray finds the paper hidden in the bed. And we went back and looked, and that's about 33, 32 minutes from the end. He guessed everything he could imagine. He never even got close. And so I think that's a really unique perspective. I would challenge, again, anybody that I know personally, and I'm talking about the average moviegoer, not the intelligent Mark Whites of the world. I just don't think anybody else is going to have your intuition.
And that's completely fair. So again, for me, just because it hit me right between the eyes early on, I disengaged a bit. I think Isabella Rossellini, who is way underrated, not appreciated as she should be, this is not the right film to give her any kind of golden hardware because not fair for the minimal amount that she's in it. It's a very minimal role for her. She delivers one very obvious line of dialogue, and that's why people are rallying behind it. I mean, she was much better in like Chimera last year, and no one saw that. So that aside, I think that's one of those issues I have with the film as well. But I also, and again, not having read the book, so I'm just as a viewer of the film here, I found Cardinal Lawrence a bit boring. Because as much as we dance around the fact that he's got a conflict of faith, he's having doubts and everything else, we don't get an awful lot as to why. And you get this smattering of hubris. You get this small tease of the fact that he thinks for a brief moment he might be the best choice for the papacy, but you don't get much else out of that. You just see him wringing his hands. You see him contemplating certain elements of this. It's Ray Fiennes doing a lot of fine acting as like a juggler, but not much else. I didn't see it as an emotional performance for me. I think he's done better work in other things. So across the board, I was entertained because it is a thriller. It's beautifully shot. The cinematography is fantastic. It's handsomely clothed and costumed with this. And it's a fascinating setting. I just think there could have been much more done with the material. Maybe it's just the story overall. Maybe it's just the book itself. I would not have adapted, would have found some way to do it differently. But for me, it ran cold.
All right. I had to rush us along. I'm like, oh my gosh, we still got more to get. Is it my turn?
I think so.
Okay. Now here's one I haven't watched again. I'm here. It's Christmas. We're doing this on Christmas Day. I'm with my parents. I'm going to try to watch this. I watched it by myself, as you do a lot of these screeners. And this is when I do want to rewatch again. So it may move up or down on my list. But I really, really like Justin Kurzel's The Order. Again, a movie, hey, it sent me the screener way before Oscar season. I was like, because I'm kind of iffy on his movies. Some I like, some I don't. And there's guns on the poster, and I'm just like, I can't imagine what that looked like. But the story is good. Jude Law is excellent. This is where Nicholas Hoult really excels this year. This is where he gets to show something. Maybe not. He's played bad guys before, but he really gets to chew it in this. It's very disturbing. I mean, you've got Jude Law, Nicholas Hoult, and Ty Sheridan all in the same movie. The story's good. It's filmed on location, which I really loved. We're out in the wilderness and just beautiful drone shots and that kind of stuff. It's the look of the movie, and he's really good at setting time, but not just any location. It's not one of these thrillers shot in New York. It's not one of these thrillers shot in LA, or even like the Texas thing. He likes to take you to places like Taylor Sheridan does. It's a very Taylor Sheridan type movie where he takes you to a place you would never go, a place you'd never want to go. It's the closest thing to a hell or high water that we've had since then. And Jude Law is definitely doing his best Jeff Bridges in this movie. It's not an awards movie, really. It's came out and nobody paid any attention to it. But it's just a really well done kind of classic good guy, bad guy cop thriller, just done in a very scary, crazy religious way.
Interesting. I would say that, like you said there when you were describing it, that Kurtzel, he's somewhat hit or miss. When he's good, he's great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
When he's not, you get Assassin's Creed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. When he's
so
bad.
For me, the film that stands out for me so far in his filmography is Macbeth. I loved his adaptation of Macbeth. I haven't seen The Order yet, but that's definitely, now that we've talked about it, it's going to be a little higher on my catching up order there. But I do think that when
the Kelly Gang, that was the one.
The Kelly Gang's really good as well.
Really pushed boundaries on that one.
Oh, see, now you're tantalizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna go watch this one in the theater while I'm here home for Christmas, near a theater that would actually play this versus in Hawaii, and it's not. It's already out. It's not playing anymore.
What's next on your list?
All right, so if I'm tracking correctly, it'll be my number 6, and we've already talked a bit about this one, just shy of the top 5 there. I love the dynamic between Kieran and Jesse. It's so funny in the beginning. The chalk and cheese dynamic, the very different balance between these two cousins is so electrically funny. You can tell there's discomfort, there's awkwardness, and it's all very well executed. But there's genuine connective tissue between their body language and their expressions that allow you to really relate to the fact that they are family. And as you go through the more emotional portions where they actually roll out into the, grandma's hometown and the parts of the Holocaust they're related to and everything else, it gradually becomes very cathartic. And it's so simplistic in its catharsis that it kind of catches you almost off guard. The ending is just perfect. I mean, literally just the possibility of having someone kind of contemplating their future haphazardly, maybe absentmindedly in an airport, a place where there's all kinds of possible destinations, is so uplifting and positive, despite the fact that they've gone through some really emotional stuff. It's just wonderful. I think it's a really good, feel-good comedy drama. It's a wonderful blend of those things. And it's one of those movies that I would recommend to just about anybody.
I agree. I mean, everything I wanted to say about that movie, I've said. It's good. It's good
stuff.
And I think when I think more about the family dynamic, that could be close friends that grew up as neighbors or grew up as schoolmates, and you grow apart as time goes on, but you still have that bond from the early years.
Yeah,
it was really good. So Dustin, what's next on your list?
So next on my list is this is a cheat. This is a weird cheat so this is my number 2 if you're looking at them numerically, and it's disclaimer. Yes, no, it's a limited series. It's directed by Alfonso Cuarón. It stars Kate Blanchett, Kevin Kline. They're gonna win all the Emmys and all the stuff on that side. But I proved to James, he's like, that's a show. Alfonso Cuarón says this is a film, that he only thinks in cinema. He only shoots in cinema. He doesn't know how to do TV. He doesn't want to do TV. He shot this as a 6-hour movie, and that's what it is to him. And the more I thought about it, I couldn't unthink that. once I listen to him. And that's how I see it. It is a long 6-hour movie that's just really brilliant. I think it's some of, if not the best work of Cate Blanchett's career. It's right up there with Tar and Elizabeth. I mean, she's doing things that I've never seen her do. Kevin Kline's amazing. Just the way it's shot, using 2 different cinematographers to capture 2 specifically different time periods. It's just riveting and shocking, and there's so much to talk about. It is you could really use this and Wicked as a double feature. They're doing the same things. Like, what you see and what you've been told is not always what reality is. I like seeing that in a real life drama versus Wicked being a fantasy thing, but it's the same exact thing. Don't always trust what you're being told as the way things actually are. And it's a fascinating exercise in morality and humanity, and he does it in this thrilling, insane way that only Alfonso Cuarón can do.
So if he gets nominated for an Emmy, he's going to decline?
Then he's going to win. And Kate's already gotten the Critics' Choice nomination, and she'll get the Emmy nomination come next round. But I
So
mean,
he's acknowledging that it's his TV show and not a movie.
But he doesn't get to decide where he end up to be nominated. He's just saying
he can decline the award if he wins it.
He won't. But when he gets up, mark my words, if he wins, that's what he'll say. He's like, I don't really see this as TV. He'll say,
I'd like to thank the Academy.
He already has 3 or 4 Oscars, so it can use one that looks a little different.
I haven't seen Disclaimer at all, but all I can say is that Cuarón's work stands for itself. So if you don't know the name, if you've never seen anything that he's ever done, do yourself a favor and pick up anything with his last name to it.
I wouldn't pull this weird ranking. James knows how I feel about television anyway. I don't like to mix the mediums. But whenever both of you get time to watch it, and I hope you do, I think you'll understand why I have it here.
Even if you, as a casual filmgoer, start your study of Cuarón's work with Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, you're in for a good time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll leave that there. Shall we talk about The Brutalist next?
I'll listen.
Everybody? Okay. So The Brutalist is on my list. So
it's number 4 for me, James.
So I loved it. It was too long. There were places that he could have whittled down. I think it was too long. When I saw it at the film festival, they had an intermission. I will now go back and watch it now that I've got access to the screener. I will go back and watch it without the intermission and see how I feel about it. But I think my feeling at that time, that intermission was kind of a plot device because the movie changed drastically in pacing and in content after the intermission. And I think it started out as one movie and ended up as another one. That being said, it was still, I appreciated the avant-garde. I appreciated the relationships between the Jewish immigrant who comes here and the Americans that embrace him or don't embrace him when he gets here. So that societal oppression and that tension, that was, that again, that's the kind of thing we've seen before, but I haven't seen it portrayed the way it was portrayed in this film. I think Adrian Brody's given his best performance in The Pianist. I think everybody else agrees. So I would be very surprised if he doesn't win.
So it's number 4 on my list. And I did not sadly get to see it in a motion picture cinema. I got to see it as a screener, and I will let you know in advance. The intermission is literally only 60 seconds. So unless you hit pause and then actually get up to go to the bathroom, whatever you're going to do, it's only that 60-second interval. The intermission is a plot device to an extent because it literally kind of almost bookends like an act 1 and an act 2 for the presentation of Laszlo's entire story. And it's effective, especially if you are taking a second to kind of let the first half wash over you, even if it is for 60 seconds or the full 15 minutes, whatever your interval is. When you go into the second half, act 2 of this particular film, it is a very different story because I think what they're trying to get out of the story here is the dichotomy of the American dream in its full extent. There's so much optimism, despite the fact that there is hardship in the first half of this particular film, that Laszlo's coming to America, surviving the voyage, learning the language, everything else that kind of comes all with it, is very optimistic. It's very American dream in pursuit of that. It's all kind of on there on the screen. Then you get the second half, which is the ugly underside of the fact that there's resistance, that there is racism, that there is xenophobia, that there is anti-Jewish sentiment. There's all these different things that come with his experience on the underside of that. So to expose and discuss the American dream in such halves, I think is incredibly effective. I also love the fact that it's shot in VistaVision. It's one of those things where, because you've gone back in time to find an art form or a media format like VistaVision, which came out in 54, this is now set in the 50s. You've got something that not only fits the time period, but fits the way that those particular movies were made in the 50s. So you're getting wide screen formatting, as wide as it possibly can go. The architecture of his designs, you're getting extremely anchored close-ups that are not traditionally anchored in center. They're actually very wide open. So you get open spaces and tall ceilings. It feels almost as if the film is being put on in front of you and you're not actually watching a film on a screen. And I loved that effect to it. I thought the music was great. Brody's fantastic. Felicity Jones is fantastic as well. It's an emotional gut punch of the immigrant journey, and it shows you both the good and the bad. And because of the times we're living in now, I think it's just as important as Sacred Fig.
I did not like it at all. I didn't like his character. I thought he was just making things worse for himself where he didn't need to be. He's cheating on his wife. He's doing drugs. I lost any empathy for him pretty early on. He's making his life worse. I mean, I don't care if it's filmed in VistaVision, if it's an IMAX, whatever. Like, those things can maybe add, but they shouldn't make you like it or not like it. Most people are going to look past that. It's not going to influence their decision to like it or not. It's insanely too long. I mean, there are so many mundane things. The music drove me insane. Maybe it was the way I watched it, but I had to constantly keep turning it up and down. Maybe the screener wasn't balanced correctly, but the music was just grating and annoying, and all I heard was just noise versus actual score. So that drove me nuts, having to keep like adjusting the volume. And because I was watching this late at night and it's, 3.5 hours long. So it was into the night and I was just like, oh my gosh, people are going to think that I'm just like stroking some weird instrument just that I can't play because it just sounds so obtuse. And the performances are good. I'm not denying that. I don't think this is near as good as or effective a performance for Brody as it was in The Pianist. And I don't think he needs 2 Oscars at this point. Guy Pearce deserves a mention. This is a very different type of role for him as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The cinematography was very good. That was the one thing that maybe kept me engaged. But I think that Brady Corbett has bit off way more than he can chew. This was way too ambitious for his third movie. His third one?
Yeah, it's his third.
This is way too ambitious for him. I would have liked to have seen, like Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese direct this movie and tone down the ambition a little bit, or at least put it in hands that are more accomplished. So much of it was a mess for me. It was just like ambition for ambition's sake. Like, yeah, it's cool the way he shoots the train scene, but it's just for ambition. It doesn't add anything to the movie. It's like, oh, look what I came up with. And then let's do something different over here that doesn't really make any sense or go with the flow of the movie. I sat down thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be the best movie of the year. I've heard everybody just gush about this. I was so excited to watch this. I was like, I've heard it so emotional, grown men crying. My expectations were so high, thinking this is just really going to be something spectacular to see. And after it was over, I'm like, this? Excited about? If you want an emotional, engaging immigrant story, in Brooklyn, starring Saoirse Ronan, with that, I can't think of another immigrant story where it really pulled the audience in to help them understand what that person might be going through emotionally. But this didn't give me anything to, like, I couldn't find my way in at all. Nowhere.
I can empathize with what you're saying there as far as, the characters not being anybody you'd want to, except for the, his friend that he meets in the soup line. I don't think there was anybody there that had a redeeming character. But I don't think that was the point. I think the point was people are complicated, and every person that we read about in the history books is heroic, had flaws.
I agree, but I guess my point: this is a movie that Brady Corbett made for film critics or cinema people. This is not a movie that you can sit your mom and pop down at Christmas and watch. This is not a movie that main Academy members are going to all just sit down and love. It is made for like specific cinephiles and for general audiences.
I disagree with that. I agree that that Deadpool 2 crowd is not going to have a Deadpool 3 crowd, whatever. They're not going to get this movie That's the expectation. That's the audience he was shooting for.
No, I'm
He
saying
definitely
the
missed that mark.
the Return of the King crowd is not going to get this. The Departed crowd is not going to get this.
I don't know if that's true. I disagree with that.
I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's finally coming out. It's limited release, and it did get a rated R. It had been not rated at the time I saw it. So we'll see. You're right. But again, is this a movie we're going to be talking about in 10 years? I think so.
We might be arguing about it in 10 years.
Yeah, I don't doubt.
Okay. Mark, what's next on your list?
All right. So moving into the top 5 for me then, sitting at number 5 rather comfortably, going back to my creepy crawly roots, I've got to give a special shout out to Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. There is something about Eggers' specificity, his attention to detail, which just speaks to me. I love the fact that he researches so in-depthly, that he puts so much effort into recreating period, whether it's in costume design, set design, using natural lighting aesthetics for certain films, using archaic language to get certain things across. He's so dedicated to that element of it that world building, the way he does it, is effortless. To kind of go back to what Marnow did in the silent era and reimagine Nosferatu for a modern audience that embraces the romance of the story, that embraces the gothic of the story, that really amps up the horror of the story, to me ticked every single box across so many different levels. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was genuinely terrifying. It's like, to be frank, it's one of the horniest movies I've seen all year. It speaks to ideas of female agency. It talks about gender roles and Thomas's role as far as being the heroic figure and being actually terrified of the responsibility and the sheer terror of what he's confronting in the vampire. I think Bill Skarsgård is one of the best character actors out there. He will just throw himself in to whatever he's asked to do, no questions asked, and find parts of his body that he can use as an instrument in ways that most people wouldn't even imagine. I love the fact that his voice is not modulated with CG. That's him on set, on camera, doing that. I think it's fantastic. I love the fact that it's a wonderful tribute to the silent era. Some of the cinematography and the lighting of it actually evokes monochrome. Certain sequences, especially with the snow and the moonlight, are just brilliantly executed. I thought it was fantastic. I know that there are probably other films that people will rate higher this year, and I myself have done the same. But for a horror genre fanatic like myself, for someone who loves Eggers' work, and for someone who can see the meticulous time and care that goes across the technical categories in this film, from the cinematography to the costume and makeup and everything else, the production design, this deserves special attention for what is literally put on screen.
Cinematography, I agree with you. Like, it's spectacularly shot. And I do love how some scenes look totally black and white and make you appreciate the color once you actually get the color.
Mm-hmm.
But I was bored out of my mind. One vampire movie, you've seen them all. This one hits every cliche, every little thing. Like, there's nothing new. Thought really wasn't sexy enough. I mean, for a movie about, it's not just that Nosferatu wants to, eat some blood. It's like he wants some woman.
He wants her.
It's like, well, that's not sexy at all. And it's like, there was just so many missed opportunities here with so many different things, and how Aaron Taylor Johnson was so underused here. And Skarsgård is completely hidden away in this. I mean, you could have had anybody covered up in that. It could have been Andy Serkis. It could have been anybody. He's so disguised, you wouldn't know if he was even in costume. They could just say, Bill Skarsgård's in there, and you wouldn't know the difference. I mean, he's so covered up. How do you
get serious?
Actually, him, and I know it was him, but I'm just saying he's so covered up. You don't know. You can't. There's nothing of him that you can actually see.
But again, we're talking about a horror film that you're allowed to have that. You get small glimpses with him under the makeup where you can tell it's definitely him under the eyes and makeup and everything else.
I can appreciate the craft of this movie, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't horrified. I was like, when will this end? I mean, if you want to see, children being eaten for Christmas, this is your movie. I was so not interested. And as someone who liked the Vitch, I think that's still his best work. I think he's one of these directors that less is more. And this, again, seemed like more for more sake. It was all about how it looks and not how it plays. But again, that's just my opinion.
Wow. I'm in the middle.
For you, James.
Right? The safe place. I went back and I watched the original Nosferatu, the silent version, and I watched Werner Herzog version with some other film critics from Houston before watching this one. And I can see the transition, and I can definitely appreciate that. Not just, set design was authentic. Costumes were authentic. Even the dialogue was authentic. And so that level of craft, I certainly appreciate. Was this a strict interpretation of that original 1922 movie? I think it was. And so if you've already seen the story, like Dustin said, you knew how it was going to end, and there was no surprise. And maybe I didn't want a surprise. I mean, if it, was true to the story, I like that. I can appreciate that. But I don't think a fan of horror movies, which I am definitely not one, is going to go in here and say, this is better than Scream 2, or this is better than whatever else. I think someone who's comfortable with the 1922 version will be very comfortable with the 2024.
Absolutely.
But I like all the craft that was put into it, hands down.
It definitely one to watch for the technical areas when the Oscars start to roll their way forward.
I agree. That would not surprise me one bit. You mentioned horniest movie of the year. I don't think this was it, but I do think Challengers was.
That's a good call there.
That would have been my number 12.
So that was on my list. Challengers moved the needle in a way that other movies this year just didn't. I thought this was Zendaya doing things she had never done before. This was Josh O'Connor doing things he's done before, but not a role he's played before, but playing a similar character, but very, very differently.
Yeah.
I think the ending was spectacular.
The ending is fantastic.
The editing. I mean, this movie has to get nominated for editing.
I think the ending is textbook. They're going to be teaching this in film school years from now. It was really, really good. And I kind of was worried about this movie, and maybe I should have been. I don't hear anything about it so much now because it peaked out and it came out so early in the year. But I still
it's on a lot of people's top 10 list.
I still think it's one of the best movies made this year.
I agree with that. There were just other movies that made me a little more excited, that spoke to me on a more emotional level, that kind of just found their way into a structure of a top 10 list. But Challengers is definitely one of the better films of the year for sure. I love the fact that of the two films Luca put out this year, this is somehow way more complex than Queen.
Way more effective.
I think the triangle between the three principal players here is so messy, and it's so complex, and it's so incredibly difficult to define for anyone to try and sell it like in a quick review or advertisements on newspapers or television. They want to try and play up like the bisexual angle or the guy on guy angle. That's not what this is about. There's sportsmanship, there's jealousy, there's rivalry here. And it's right at the forefront of this. You can almost feel the sweat between the three of them. It's really something different. It really, truly is.
Yeah. And it really hit the zeitgeist and the social media crowd. I mean, it hit so many different levels.
And Josh O'Connor, I mean, dude is going places.
Yeah. Maybe James Bond. So I'm going to mention another one that got lost in the shuffle because it had a weird release schedule. James and I actually saw it back in 2023. It wasn't released until 2024. It's Anthony Hopkins in One Life. It's another World War II film, true story. Just really amazing. Again, no reinvention of the wheel here. It's another one of those framing stories where the one guy's thinking back and we're seeing the story happening. It's stuff that we've seen before. It's just so emotional, so well done, so heartbreaking. Talk about grown men crying, including me, coming out of the theater. I don't think anybody had a dry eye. Even the press person at the screening at Toronto, as we're walking out, couldn't get responses from anyone because they were all crying. They were crying so much nobody could talk to her. Just a really beautiful, sweet. And this would be the good movie to watch on Christmas time if you want some humbling. Another solid Anthony Hopkins performance. He should be getting nominated for supporting, but just nobody saw it. It was released the wrong time of the year. The studio isn't pushing it, but it's a really great little film.
I agree. I enjoyed it when I saw it. It had a lot of the similar themes that Blitz does. So maybe.
Yeah, it pairs really well with Blitz. I think we're here in Europe for as long as I have. I've got family in the United Kingdom and everything else. I was familiar with the story for this one when Dustin introduced it to me beginning of the year. So I knew what I was expecting, basically beat for beat as I was going in. But to sit down and get some of the smaller details and just the way that this is actually shot, where you actually get some really fantastic European architecture and locations that kind of really take you into the actual world of the war as it's unfolding, and the urgency of getting these children, these innocent victims, away from the war zone as quickly as possible. It drives the emotional point home I think if you were to do this and Blitz like one after the other in some kind of screening marathon, you'd probably need Gatorade afterwards just because you're going to be so dehydrated from crying all the way through. It's a really good little film.
All I have left is Nora to talk about. Did anybody else review Nora or have it on your list?
No. So I have it on my worst list.
Yeah, it's not on my
Okay.
list at all.
Wow. Okay. I'll happily talk about Honora. So
Go right ahead.
I think Honora is probably not going to win a lot of awards for anything other than Mikey Madison's performance. And I think that was the one thing that makes the movie. I like how his movies always kind of show a little slice of society that we don't normally see. And this is no exception. This is a movie people are going to be pointing to and referring to in the years to come.
I just don't get this movie. I don't understand it. I didn't laugh at all. I just was completely lost on me. I don't understand what's so good about it.
I think the problem people are having is the subject. You know, there's nobody that you feel like they're one worst enemies. They're all,
Well, that's all of his movies. I mean, personally, I liked Red Rocket better, and there was way worse characters in that, and way less people to root for. But I thought Red Rocket was funnier. I thought it was more creative, more energetic. This, I don't know. I watched again, having heard all the hype. This is Sean Baker's best film yet. And I've interviewed Sean Baker. I've met him. He's a nice guy. It's just a bare bones film. He's also not a general audience filmmaker either. His stuff is still niche, even though this is the most accessible thing that he's done. This is the one that he worked with more real actors in this versus the other things that he does. But
Yeah.
I can kind of understand why some people criticize his exploitation type stuff. But I just had no emotion for this, no interest. I didn't think it was funny. I wasn't amused. I wasn't entertained. I just found nothing to like about this movie.
So I didn't hate it anywhere near as much as Dustin did. I wouldn't even use the word hate. I enjoyed it while watching it. I don't think it resonated with me as much because I don't think Baker's focus zeroes in enough on who Honora actually is. We know what she does. We see the lifestyle that she is living before she gets married. And then you get kind of thrown into this trash and clear heels Cinderella story of sorts that meanders between the lifestyles of the rich and the famous and then some sort of criticism about something, but Baker doesn't quite come forward to say what it is. And for me, I think it's just the messaging, the storytelling here. It wasn't as precise as it could have been. Baker's done better stuff. I agree with Dustin. I think Red Rocket was much funnier. I think Simon Rex was an accidental revelation in that. But, you look at other stuff like The Florida Project, even Tangerine, which is now becoming something of a cult classic.
Mm-hmm.
Honora might end up aging better. You never know. But I do think compared to his other works, he's done better films. And I think the only reason people are actually pushing this as hard as they are is because it is a story that is examining sex work in a normalized fashion. And that's the only reason it's getting attention.
Mm-hmm. And the fanboys, the Spider-Man, those type of guys love these little horny, ooh, look at this hot girl naked. Some of those guys love those types of movies. I'm sorry to say, but that's the truth. They love this, oh my gosh, hot girl naked, making light of sex.
Well, I don't think that was me at all. I think the movie has merits. So let me throw another one in there. And this is not on my list, but The Last Showgirl, which
I loved it. I would like to watch that again. Did you
also about
we haven't talked about what you thought about that, did we?
No, we have not. Dustin, where would you put it?
Oh, I like The Last Showgirl way better. That
same subject matter.
I understood, yes, the aging out thing, everybody can identify with that. I never in a million years thought that I would vote Pamela Anderson as my number one female acting choice for Best Actress, as I did with The Critics' Choice. I'm upset that she didn't get in there. The Golden Globes nominated her, but that was just shocking that she was so good and understood that, and it was so personal to her. It was kind of like what Sean Baker did for Simon Rex in Red Rocket. This was done for her in this movie, just on a much more
and exactly right. And I think that role was Simon Rex was unique for that role. Other people could have played it, but he lived it.
Yes, and same here.
The same thing with Pamela Anderson, and unfortunately, you're right. She's probably not going to get another. This was probably her best shot at a golden statue, and I don't think she's going to get one. Mark, what else is on your list?
Well, we've talked the Brutalist already with your selection there, so we've already addressed that as my number 4. I've got 3 more to go. So
Brutalist?
Dune is my number 1 choice. That takes 1 out of the listing there. So that brings me down to number 3 and number 2. Number 3 on my list was Queer, and number 2 on my list was Sing Sing.
Let's talk about Queer.
Okay. This spoke to me in a rather deeply profound way because as someone who's read Burroughs' work, it's really uncomfortable to find a main character that does despicable, terrible, harmful, dirty, crazy things and still find their humanity somewhere deep within that resonates on such a level where you actually care. So when you realize that this is Burroughs' life story kind of very loosely folded over onto a protagonist he's written who is simultaneously trying to accept his homosexuality while playing it off as if he doesn't care, but he's also damaging his body because he's trying to numb the guilt and the pain from being homosexual, from all sorts of elements of his life, which Luca does dive into as the story progresses. You're given a very complex, very unlikable, but somehow likable protagonist. And Daniel Craig does such a fantastic job of showcasing everything from vulnerability to swagger to desire to the need for empathy. And then you pair it to this story where this broken person is now looking for some way to connect to another person. He thinks he's found some magical solution in a recreational herb that'll allow him to do that. But you move it back to that universal need for connection, that universal need for empathy and understanding. And it just becomes this incredibly dense emotional experience. I love the fact that Luca dives into Burroughs' actual life history, and in some of the drug-addled dream sequences, you see massive elements of Burroughs' life done as dreams, including the famous William Tell gunshot set with his wife and everything else. It's a very studied take on Burroughs' work. I love the fact that it blends the rules and the lines between reality and fiction, even deciding to build sets to recreate Mexico City as if it's a fake place when we know it's a real place. There's some very smart choices that allow this to blend that world between fake and real so much that the life of the artist, the life of the damaged artist is the focal point here. I thought it was fantastic. I know that we've talked Challengers earlier, and I do think Challengers appeals to more people. It's a much easier film to follow, but I think that on terms of sheer emotion, and just the exploration of the human condition in such a very honest portrayal, Queer knocks it out of the park. That last sequence, yes, is a hallucinogenic dream sequence, but the idea of blurred images exploring the human body and then trying to connect the soul and everything else, it is a very big, very on-the-nose metaphor, but it's done in such a tender way that it translates across all genders, all sexual persuasions, all races. It's just a very human story. So for me, I was moved. I was not expecting to be moved because I've read the book and thought, okay, this is going to be really tough to do. But Luca, as always, finds a way to surprise. And I thought it was just fantastic.
Well, I appreciate your dissection of that. I did not like this movie at all. I like Leslie Manville. That was the only positive to say about it. That's about it.
Well, I can appreciate what it took to make this movie. I can say that Daniel Craig, this is the first time I ever saw Daniel Craig play a role where I didn't see Daniel Craig in the role. All right. He actually became his character. That's a first for Daniel Craig. So, maybe he should embrace more of these types of roles.
But that's probably the James Bond curse. Like once you're in that tuxedo, it is so hard to get out of it.
Well, I mean, we saw him in things before James Bond, but you're right.
Always so B-listed before. Then he became 007.
This is the way to break out. Maybe it's possible that he's showing the path, breaking away from his typecast role. But that part I liked a lot. I like the way, and I haven't read the book, and actually the book's not in print in this country. You can't even buy it here yet unless you get a used copy.
I tracked down a first edition copy after I saw the film.
Good for you. Yeah. So maybe we can start a lending library between.
There you go.
But yeah, so I have not read this book, but I am familiar with Burroughs, and you're right. I mean, you knew it was going to be a hard sell, and I don't think it's going to appeal to mainstream audiences.
So you're right.
I do think Luca Guadagnino did a good job of bringing that to life, and I'm glad it made your list. Very glad it made your list. Dustin, Sing Sing, was that on your list?
No.
Mark, let's talk about Sing Sing.
Okay, so I'm going to get a little personal because, James, we've never actually conversed. I mentioned earlier that as a high school student, I did theater stuff in our high school drama department. So I'm very familiar on a very rudimentary level what the process. So, you know, finding characters, doing exercises to warm up your vocal instrument, doing silly things to kind of get you out of your comfort zone. So the moment we started doing like the actor circles stuff, I was like, okay, this is old territory for me on a very basic level. I understand what this is supposed to be. But then you get to meet Coleman's character. And as you spend time with him, and you can see that obviously he's very well read, he is actually into all of this. He has an appreciation, not just for the process, but for what acting and theater and stage can do. He's also battling a very specific personal drama himself, where he's wrongfully accused and incarcerated for a severely long time for something he did not do. And in trying to better other people, he's trying to also get himself out of prison. So what you're seeing is someone who has not reconciled his own innocence and his own situation, while other people around them are actually reconciling really serious, terrible crimes, everything from rape to murder to, you know, excessive battery, all these different things. So you're getting to see the arguably most damaged human beings in society finding the tools and the space, the safe space to explore different emotions, different elements of their masculinity, different elements of acceptable behavior for men in a way that allows them to rehabilitate themselves. So for me, just on a purely emotional gut reaction to what the story was, I was immediately sold. I was immediately sold into what the story was going to be about. To know that it's a true story made it even better. But then as you ride along the story with Coleman's performance, where you see him really connecting with people and enjoying the discovery of self in the acting process with people who you would never assume to be talented actors or people who would be capable of doing Hamlet, things like that. He is also fighting a personal struggle to try and find and prove his own innocence. And it just breaks your heart that for someone doing such good work for other people, he's being looked over. And that actually left me in tears. I don't cry all that easily, but this truly did have me wiping away tears because it's such a raw emotional experience for one character. And he's doing such good for other people who've probably done way worse things that to me, it was just one emotional wave after the other. I think that it is handsomely shot. I think the acting is absolutely fantastic. Coleman, again, showing he is one of the best in the business. And it's just such a unique human perspective story that I think more people should see to really kind of find the hope in mankind, because we're talking bad people in prison who have done terrible things, but they're being given a chance to forgive themselves. They're giving a chance to work through their stuff. And it's just really uplifting and positive. So I know it's not exactly a standard traditional feel-good film, but it left me feeling hopeful. It left me feeling emotionally moved. And I love the fact that acting as a process is being given the opportunity to show just that. It can be therapeutic. It can be hopeful. It can be explorative of the human condition. And I think that's something that's worth celebrating in film. So outside of Dune this year, this one moved me the most.
Wow. I can agree with the movement. I had 2 opportunities to watch this movie before I watched it. Actually did watch it because I felt like the subject matter was going to be something predictable, and it really wasn't. And I regret that I waited so long to watch it. Coleman Domingo is great. He's been great for a long time. The rest of you are
always
starting to realize how great he is. Problem that movie had with me wanting to watch it is the same problem that it's going to have with the award season. You know, a lot of people are going to, there's no feel good movie vibe coming off of that. And so even though it turns out to be kind of a happy ending, the vibe isn't there to bring a lot of people to this movie. I think that's the reason it hasn't had the traction, because it's been out quite a while.
It has. And I know that A24 is pushing it here in just a few weeks as a reintroduction to cinemas, because there is substantial clout in some of the guilds for where it might actually stand out most, including with the screenwriters, because it is an adaptation. But Coleman is now also doing the press tour over here in Europe, because I think it's pushing itself out here in cinemas just now, because A24's distribution is different from the way it is in the States. So with the BAFTAs, if it suddenly gains clout over the next few weeks, the story might change. But I do think it's one of those films that more people should see, because it really truly is just so uplifting. I felt really positive afterwards. Yes, people have done terrible things, but look at the outcome if you put the work in, you know, like dig deep, put the work in and see what you get out of it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this movie has an audience problem, but if you can get the audience in front of it.
It's funny. I've mentioned it to several people who've asked me, you know, what did you like this year? And I've mentioned it by title. And I don't know how many people went, ooh, that sounds like a musical. Like, no, Sing Sing's a prison, not a musical.
Yeah. What's left on your list?
So I only have one more, and this is my obscure movie. This would actually have been my number 10, but it's worth mentioning. It's called Catching Dust. Neither one of you have probably seen it.
I've seen it.
You saw it? Did I send it to you?
Yes. You did,
Okay.
yes.
I just thought it was a really unique film. This was one of those weeks where I just didn't have anything to review. A studio sent me this. I was like, what's this? Oh, it's set in West Texas. Let's see what this is. And just was really amazed at this newish filmmaker, Stuart Gatt, playing with light and cinematography and suspense and isolation and putting two groups of people together that should never have met and just watching the chaos unfold and the dialogue that happens between them. It's certainly an imperfect movie, but it really kept my attention. It never went where I thought it was going to go. And it kind of showed me characters that I hadn't seen before. I just found it a really interesting exercise in independent filmmaking.
Erin Moriarty's brilliant in this. She's so captivating as Gina in that. And, you know, Jai Courtney should do more stuff.
He does a lot of TV, guys. But yeah, he should do more big screen.
I mean, just finding different characters for him to take on. Like, he's a big dude. I mean, he's a really big, hulking, like A grade type of alpha male. So you see him popping up in things like the Suicide Squad. You're like, yeah, okay, I get why he's been cast in that. But to see him in this, where he's actually really a battered, really grisly type of guy, it's fascinating. It's genuinely fascinating to watch him actually show a battered heart beneath all the bravado and the abuse and everything else. It's an interesting role for him. It really is.
It's almost like Roman Polanski's Carnage, but in the West Texas version.
That's a good way
for a comparison. That's it for me.
Thank you for listening. If you agree or disagree with our picks, let us know in the comments section. To read our reviews on these films and others, check us out at texasartfilm.com.